Is recording. Sweet. So actually, there's a couple of ways. You probably are quite aware of this. I really prefer to use Google Earth Pro. It's free. You can download it for both Windows or Mac as a desktop version. I think it works a little bit better, has a hell of a lot more tools. Yes, Sandra?
We would see the recording like modules or.
Oh, it'll be on my YouTube, and you'll see my YouTube link actually on my Miro board. And actually, I think I have my Miro board up right now, so we can kind of pull it up. Were you guys able to get on the Miro board?
Yes.
Sweet. And if you need that Miro link, that is on the announcements in Canvas. I try to stay away from Canvas just because it's a bit limited, both in megabytes and just a lot of things. So I prefer to use Miro, and you can kind of hit me up at any time. It even gives me like a notification similar to like a text, right? If somebody posts stuff there, which can get kind of annoying, but it is kind of nice that I'm able to see everybody's stuff. But yeah, just like last week, you guys were posting your stuff, and you're more than welcome to actually use this as like a workspace too. I mean, you can work together digitally. I don't know. We used it a lot. I mean, we'd be on Zoom on an iPad and then work together. However, this was before we had an actual studio sometimes, or sometimes we'd be in the COVID era. But regardless, it'll be on Miro. So if you go to the links right there, YouTube links, click on it. And of course, you'll find all those videos, right? Which is kind of funny. I'm about to upload a video that tells you how to get to the videos, which is kind of redundant. But it is what it is. But there are a couple of versions. So if you don't get the desktop version of Google Earth, not a problem. Or maybe say your laptop is incompatible with it. That's okay. Google Maps actually works pretty well too, but it's a little cartoony. For instance, if I want to measure something, it's not there, or at least not like it used to be back in 2005. If you go to Google Earth though, like I said, you can actually download it for yourself, and there's actually a web version as well. It is a bit slow in my opinion, especially if you're limited on the San Antonio College network, right? It can go extremely slow. Honestly, I tend to tell my students, if you have a personal hotspot on your phone, that's usually miles better already, so share the wealth in that regard. As you can see, it can take a long time, to of course load. And frankly, it does change a lot. So there's a lot of different settings. There's like these new projects now and things like that. I tend to stay away from that, and I just need the program for what it does really well. So in our case, what we're trying to achieve is some sort of measurement in real space. Now don't get me wrong, the best way to do this is actually go outside and measure something that you can refer to. For instance, we used to go outside and measure the entirety of the road, and we'd be like, oh, it's exactly 25 feet, 6 inches and a quarter. I'm going to actually use that measurement because, well, that one I verified out in reality. However, in our case, let's face it, in this situation we actually can go to the site, but in many situations in architecture, you don't have maybe the money or supplies or resources to even get to some of these places. I've designed some houses that were out in the middle of nowhere, Texas. I didn't even have an address. They just gave me coordinates, right? And so I was like, I got to find this, right? And of course, you can put in the coordinates not into Google Maps, but you can do it into Google Earth Pro, right? Which is really nice and a good feature. It's also a really weird feature if you ever just on Reddit, look up weird places, right? And they always give you a coordinate system. It's hilarious, but a lot of strange things on Google Earth. But in our case, we just need a measurement. So a couple of tools at the top. You'll see that there's a measuring tool. And we have a lot of different options. I mean, we can make a path, polygon, circle, all kinds of things. Circle's kind of nice when you want to actually derive a radius of a certain location. I mean, you can get really fancy with the information that the computers give you. But in our case, I do want it in feet, and I will try to get a 50-foot marker just because, well, in our case, Professor Bohuslav wants a 1 to 50, so that means 1 inch needs to equal 50. Now, in my case, I could really use any measurement, but I'd have to do some calculation. If I choose 50 feet, however, I just have to make it equal 1 inch, right? And of course that simplifies it for us. So in my case, I just need to find the right location. I usually don't like to put my 50-foot marker where I'm going to be putting stuff, or I usually like to put it somewhere where I can delete it easily. So out in the middle of the road is usually my go-to, and I can make it parallel with some of the lines that are already existing there. So in my case, almost nailed it. 50, And sometimes you may realize that 49.65 is not as close as 50.2 or 50.02. It's a rough ballpark. But usually in my case, I usually go a little bit bigger because, well, it gives me a little bit more space, right? Not so significantly that anybody would actually notice, but when I design, usually even for the client, sometimes it gives the illusion that there's a little bit more space to work with. Of course, by the time you get to Revit and everything's sort of solidified in terms of scale, it is what it is. But for today, 50.02 feet is actually pretty close. So I'll hit save and of course call it D for project 1 line. And I'll put 50 feet. That way I know exactly what it is. And in my case, all I have to do now is, well, make sure that it's an orthogonal view, right? Another thing that I can do, at least with Google Earth Pro, is we can go back in time. So if I wanted to see what it looked like in 1995, and especially without three-dimensional buildings, of course, the aerial footage was still in black and white, but you can of course see what was here over time. And you may be asked to actually look at the history of this site over time, or be inspired by the history of this site over time. And what's nice is in Google Earth Pro, and you guys don't believe me when San Antonio College used to just be a parking lot, right? I mean, look at that. This was before the parking garage was there. And let's skip to the time that I showed up in 2008, and we got a parking garage. So again, it's kind of interesting, especially if I was going to diagram that in some way, and I really wanted to communicate, the change over time. Where am I going to get that information? And in our case, I can simply take a screenshot and trace it. How cool is that, right? And especially once we have the Wacom tablets, you can draw right on top of it and use it in Photoshop. However, for today, we'll use 2020. Looks like February 2024 is the last time that there was a picture taken. And of course, I lost my spot. There it is. And that measurement is still there. So we need an orthogonal view. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, just because I can always get rid of, I can't necessarily just add on. So I just need to make sure that this marker is in there. And usually I try to screenshot it without some of the extra stuff and verbiage. So in my case, I'll go ahead and close that. It'll go ahead and update. Again, I always make sure that it's orthogonal because that is a lot different measurement than that, right? That's actually, Bosa would probably notice the angle on that one. So of course, make it as orthogonal as possible. And to be fair, as rotationally orthogonal as well. That looks pretty good. The screenshot on the Mac is pretty easy. Command, Shift, and the number 4. And I'm just going to get a general area. If your sound was on, it'd make a little snapshot sound. If you're on a Windows, you'll either have to hit the print screen button or use some sort of other third-party. Is anybody familiar with a third-party app for Windows that works pretty well?
The
Snipping tool, that's what it is. Yeah, Snipping tool is definitely a good one. Is it free still? That's good.
It's already on the computers.
Oh, good, good. I'm glad they finally just added it to Windows. Because, in the 90s, it was pretty hard to screenshot stuff in Windows, unless you had a print screen button. Anyway, so we have our screenshot, we have our measurement. That's pretty much, for some of us, I know this is quite the boring review, but maybe a helpful refresher as well. In my case, we just need to go and put it, hopefully you guys will see that today, and basically put it into Rhino. So in my case, this is a brand new file for Rhino, and the first thing I always do is type in units, enter, and make sure that it's not in its default millimeters. In my case, I could use feet or inches, really just anything in the empirical system. You could even use miles, but that would be, you'd have to do a lot of calculations. In my case, I think feet is probably the easiest one, since that's the units that we're working in. Should be good. And the reason I don't want to draw anything first is because, well, if I draw it all first and then change the units, it's going to actually change the scale of the lines and things like that. So rule of thumb, type in units, right? And of course, make sure they're in the correct ones. In my case, on Rhino 7 and Rhino 8, all you have to do is type in picture, enter, and actually grab that screenshot that we just got. In my case, it should be on my desktop, I think. Perhaps not. Maybe it's in my screenshots and recording. Yep, that's the one. And in my case, I really just need to select a base point. So really click anywhere and kind of drag it anywhere. We're going to change the size of it anyway. So just need it on the page. If you're unfamiliar with Rhino, I know mine looks a little bit different, especially on the Macintosh. Let me get there we go, a little bit better. I usually double click on my viewport. That way, you know, it's a little bit more CAD. And if you don't have a black background, of course you can change all the colors. I just like to make it look a little bit more like CAD. Usually my Windows is actually a little bit darker. I don't know. I'm a horrible vision, so I like to change all the colors. But hopefully it's not too confusing for anybody. In our case, we need a 50-foot line, right? That's pretty much about it. And that 50-foot line represents true 50, if you will, right? In our case, I could be even more accurate since mine was actually 50.02. I could be a little bit more accurate, but again, it's almost unnoticeable. So I'm going to type in line, or I'm going to go to my layers first and double click on the white layer, so that way you guys can see it. Or of course another color that possibly you can see better. White is fine for today, so I'm going to type in line, enter, and get relatively close, right? I'm going to use this as my base point, and let's face it, I can get really in there, and I'm going to go pretty much to the fuzz of that line. I know that's kind of a, I mean, let's face it, that's like so minuscule. It's super tiny. As long as you're in the ballpark. Some people get right to the edge of the fading of the color. Some people get right to the edge of the darkness of the color. I think it's tit for tat. I usually go somewhere in between. So that's usually fine. In my case, I'm going to type in 50, so 50 feet symbol, or you could type in literally feet. Same thing. Since we're already in units of feet, you could just type in 50, right? And of course that'll work. In my case, I have an extremely small image. So I want a straight line, so I'm going to hold shift and basically click. Now this line is 50 feet. If I type in what, it's going to be like, bro, this is a 50-foot valid curved line, right? And it's going to tell you everything about it. Another thing that you could do is you could type in length. If you type in length, it's even going to tell you at the bottom 50 feet, and that's great. So there's some things that we can even verify. And trust me, it's just like architecture where you have to verify twice, then you cut, right? You measure twice, then you cut, right? Always verify. Now in our case, super simple, we're almost done. We'll take the image now, we'll type in scale. We'll choose the base point. I'll choose the other side of my red line. In my case, I'm going to choose it more of an orthogonal way, so you know, about the same distance there. I'm kind of using my radius, if you will. I'm kind of squinting a little, getting as close as possible. And now it's going, hey, what do you want this to match? Well, I want it to match 50 feet. So I want to make sure I find the other side of my line and make sure that it clicks there. And wonderfully said, now we have a 1 to 50, or at least this image now is true size, right? So if I just print it out, what's going to happen? There's going to be a blob of color because it's actual size, right? So my trick, and just in case you have never had my class before, this might be the only reason you wouldn't know it, but I have a special trick in Rhino to scale stuff to paper, right? And I find it pretty useful because, well, I don't have to make any separate layout windows. I don't have to mess with the scales in the computer. I don't even have to make 2 different Rhino files, right? Basically, all I have to do is make a rectangle. But it's a very specific size rectangle. So in my case, my guess is at 1 to 50, this will probably fit on 11 by 17. So let's try a 11 by 17 paper. And essentially, I mean, if you can't do large sums in your head, that's fine. I mean, I can't either, right? So in my case, I'm going to use my calculator. Also, if you flip your calculator, it's kind of cool. You get a lot more spaces. So in my case, I want to do 11 by 17, and it's at 1 to 50. I know that there's 11 inches in the paper, and there's 17 inches in the paper. Now what that translates to is a certain amount of feet that I can fit on paper, right? But only 11 by 17 in this case. So I'll need to do 11 times 50. So 11 times 50. That one's probably easy. 550. So I'm going to click for my rectangle. And I'm going to type in 550 feet. And by 17, so 17 times 17 times 50, because there's 50 feet, 850 feet. And this, my friends, this box now represents 11 by 17 at 1 to 50 scale. So what's really nice is I didn't have to do anything to this, and I don't want to. In fact, one of my main rules in the digital space and the way that it was taught to me is that you keep in the digital space a 1-to-1 ratio, right? I mean, if you're modeling the solar system, it's even got units for that. You can use light years, you could do all kinds of stuff, right? But you do want to make it a 1-to-1 scale, right? And if you ever actually do this with the Earth, it's hilarious. One time I modeled the sun and the Earth, and I was zooming out for days. Like, I never found the sun. It was incredible. But my model said it was there, so whatever. But in our case, actually what we can verify is that this image more or less does actually fit on 11 by 17. You guys see that? Let's do it again for, let's say, maybe I only have a letter-sized piece of paper. So I already know 11, so that would be 550 feet. And it's the same scale, so it's still times 50, right? So I'd still have 11 times 50, which is 550. And the one that I'll need is 8.5, just because, they told us in the 90s we wouldn't have a calculator in our pockets, and they lied. 425 feet. Awesome. And as you can see, it looks like a letter size compared to a 11 by 17. But what's nice is now I can hover this around and go, hey, my whole site fits on a letter size. You see what I'm saying here? So those are my two pieces of paper, and I could even type in text and make sure that I remember it. So if I want to do 11 by 17 paper at 1 to 50. Oh, I guess you don't have to spell paper correctly, but probably best. And we'll go ahead and put that there. If it's entirely too small, just make it a lot bigger, right? But again, I like to keep organized and not do the same thing over and over again. So I save it, right? Because I know I'm going to need some more paper later. I may need 24 by 36. I may need, you see what I'm saying? However, what if it was in a quarter scale? What would I do? The same thing. However, it's going to make it a lot smaller, right? Or at least it's going to make the image bigger, right? So in our case, we're kind of going Alice in Wonderland with it, right? We're doing the opposite to actually make the opposite bigger, right? Anyway, just in case you were never taught that trick, I find it to be way easier than setting up random layout ports, and because programs all do that differently, right? So you'll learn it in one program and you'll be like, oh crap, how do I make a model space and a layout space in CAD versus Revit versus Rhinoceros, when actually this trick just works for all of them. You see what I'm saying here? Anyway, just in case you weren't taught it. From here, might as well take it into Illustrator, right? I mean, this is where I can give this a little bit of transparency. So like if you go to the properties, if I click on the picture itself, and then go to this little, it's the material tab, but it looks like a little paint tube, right? If you click on that, it'll load up a little bit, and you can actually give it some transparency, which is really great when you want to draw on this, right? A lot of transparency even. That way, again, I can draw what I want with it, or even highlight something. So in my case, like a polyline, maybe I actually want to get the boundary. And again, I'm going to do that in this program. Obviously, I'm just kind of making up a fake boundary for you guys real quick. And I would do all my drawing here, right? I could even hide these things or put them on separate layers and things like that, right? But from here, I definitely want one of these boxes to put into Illustrator. That way I can, again, make it easier for myself. So last but not least, let's get it in Illustrator. Assuming that, I did my drawings, maybe some hatching, some text work. A lot of that stuff we do in Illustrator anyway, so, I mean, why not do it in one program, right? We'll do it from there. I want it on 11 by 17. I kind of want to copy that one, just in case I want it later. And you may notice that the image is actually outside of the box. That's okay. You can choose the box, you can type in trim, and yes, you can click on the image itself and it'll trim it. Gosh, I wish Photoshop and other programs just all work like that, right? There's just a command bar for Photoshop. That'd be great. In my opinion, in 15 years, it'll all be one program called Architecture Student or something. I don't know, maybe I'll make it. I don't know. But There are a lot of companies that are trying to go this route to make this one unified system that does everything for architecture. And unfortunately, you may have noticed, they're all different. And actually, I kind of like that diversity. I mean, Twin Motions looks a little different than Inkscape. Inkscape looks a little different than V-Ray. V-Ray looks a little different than Lumion. And I think that's actually kind of nice because then it means we can actually all not have to look the same. So don't get me wrong, there's nothing bad about it. It just means you got to learn 8 different programs. But what I'm trying to tell you is you guys become the masters of your workflow. You don't have to use certain programs. If you don't like them, you don't like them. In my case, the Adobe and Rhino are what is used in the professional world. So it makes a lot of sense to train that way. Don't get me wrong, there are free versions such as Inkscape and I forget the one for Photoshop. Kale, do you remember? GIMP, which is just a weird word, you know, right? In fact, I have a handicapped friend who calls himself GIMP, and I'm like, dude, don't say that, man, like about yourself. But he's hilarious. He makes fun of himself. He's a comedian as well, so it's hilarious that he gets people to laugh at his own disability. But he's actually quite genius in that regard. But anyway, from here, we basically just need to put it into Illustrator. So I'm going to select just what I need because obviously I don't need every single bit. I'm going to go to File and Export Selected. In my case, I'm just going to put it on the desktop. In your case, it'd probably not be a bad idea to put it in D4, graphics section. You see what I'm saying? Start to get really organized with that. You'll help yourself literally 5 years from now. You'll be like, what the heck was that project that I did really well? It was the first project, you know? And it's not labeled final project 1 Bohuslav 3, you know? Something that's impossible to remember. So in my case, I don't want to save it as a Rhino 8 file. That won't work. In your case, as long as you have the upmost Adobe Illustrator file, you can actually use just an Adobe Illustrator file. It exports as an Adobe Illustrator. However, if you don't, you can also use a DWG, a DXF, an SVG. I mean, there's a lot of file types that, of course, Adobe opens. So if one doesn't work, try another. In my case, I'm going to actually try the Adobe Illustrator and just call it Test Site Plan. I guess I could put 1 to 50 as well. So I'm going to put it on my desktop so I can find it, export, and it's going to go, hey, some options. You'll notice that it's actually locked into a certain view. Now that we have that bounding box to scale, doesn't matter if we export it to scale or not to scale. Another great advantage, I think, because again, that's just more opportunity that I can get the scale wrong. You see what I'm saying here? I can't tell you how many times I almost got fired because it was at the wrong scale, right? And especially after the second time, I made sure like always do a test print and like check the scale myself and then give it to the principal. But it happens. You run these intern projects and you learn a lot from, of course, doing those things. But we'll export it. Good to go. Minimize. Nice beautiful day in pixelated land. And we'll go ahead and open up Adobe Illustrator. Again, probably a review for most of us, but you know, I know Longoria, myself, Professor Alman, we all teach it differently. So might as well unify us, at least from the beginning. In my case, I'm going to start a new file, and I'm going to make sure that it's an 11 by 17. I could, since I saved it as an Illustrator file, I could just open that Illustrator file. In fact, we'll do both. We'll make the 11 by 17, and you'll see the difference of opening it up as itself. So we got that test site plan. And as you can see, as a test site plan, it's like, what did you want again? Right? It's like almost nothing's there. And there actually should be an image here. So let's find out what went wrong. And as you can see, it's extremely tiny because of the scale that we got. And let's find out. It looks like layer 5 and the default didn't come in. It got my lines. That's good. But it didn't get my image. What could I possibly do? Two options. I can export it as a DWG, and it'll probably keep that photo. Don't get me wrong, that seems easier. Another thing that I can do is just simply put that screenshot back in. However, I trimmed it a little bit so it won't be the same size. That might not be the best option. But there is technically 2 in there. In my case, let's just export it as a DWG, see what happens. Same file type. We'll do that again. I like to choose actually the least amount of years, so like 2007. Sometimes it says 2004. Choose the least amount of year, usually is a little bit more successful, or just CAM Imperial, right, is my go default when it comes to DWGs. So we'll do that. Let's try that again. And again, Illustrator will actually open up a DWG. So we'll just go to File, Open, and open that DWG. It's going to be like, do you want it in feet? And actually, that's a really good question. Do I want it in feet? Layout units, I definitely want it in inches. We'll see what that does. Well, that can't be good. Gave us the same thing. Wait, maybe it didn't. Did it even open? That was weird. Let's try that again. It's like it tried, but it didn't open. Oh, it's already open. Oh, it needs to be repaired. That's weird. That's new to me. Well, let's find out why. I mean, I guess we could do it here too, but let's find out why. Good thing it gives us the 11 by 17. Not too shabby there. I mean, technically we could still, I can show you both methods. Let's do that first. That way I don't have to waste any time in the tutorial itself. I'm gonna go ahead and change my lines though to a different color because I can't see it on that white background. I'm gonna switch it to black. See it a lot better. And I can start to see that sight and even that measurement I gave myself. Okay, so we're not in too bad of a shape. So we'll take that piece, and of course I need to line up essentially just one of those sides. And even the program starts to help you with that, right? That bounding box that I made that was 11 by 17. We basically need to hold shift. Make sure that it's staying proportional. Be very careful because if you don't hold shift, it does this thing. Right, so you have to hold shift. And wait for it to, and it should, of course, exactly align with that 11 by 17 that we started. If you don't have an 11 by 17 to start with, you can always go to File, Document Setup, Edit Artboards, and of course make sure that it's 11 by 17. So if you click on it, right at the top you'll see 17 inches wide and 11 inches exactly. Now, last but not least, of course our image didn't come in. However, it did give us certain attributes of that image. In our case, it gave us the midpoints of where that image should be. In my case, since we drew some bits that we could align to, it's not exactly the end of the world. I can simply just take that screenshot and drag it right in. Or do it the right way and go to File, Place, and find that image. So in my case, it's in my downloads, screenshots, and that piece right there. Right? Yes, do I have to align it up a little bit more now? Sure, but at least I already have the line there. And it's not the end of the dang, man. It came in perfect. Almost. I mean, arguably, not bad there. Now the last thing to do is of course check it, and we can check it here first. And actually, look at that. It's even got that trim section. So, I mean, a lot of good news in that regard. But what's nice about this is, of course, I can draw it back a little bit, give it a sense of our architectural detail. Usually we want our lines to mean more than usually the background of Google. So I desaturated it just by changing its opacity and using that white background to make it give it sort of a whitewash look. However, the last thing to verify, basically I just need to hover in the rule area and drag it out, right? In my case, I want to get the bottom and the top, and I just want to make sure that it's an inch, right? Get fairly close. I have to go way over there. Oh yeah, never mind, different program. And there you go, right below the half and right below the half by the exact same amount. And it's scaled an inch. Again, probably a review for most of us, but just in case you've never done that before, or maybe even in these two different programs, hopefully a helpful video in that regard. And it's actually at your site, so should be somewhat familiar as well. Any other questions about scaling or something else that maybe I missed and you have questions about? Fair enough. Any questions about the photo montage? It looks like you guys are actually doing those more or less analog, which is pretty cool. Do you know how to scan those? There's a couple ways. Some of them might actually fit in the big bed scanners, but you'd want to tape them down to obviously some sort of butcher paper or regular bond paper, and make sure literally every corner is taped right before you scan that thing. Another way to do it is, of course, photo merge, which I would probably recommend. You'd get a better shot. It would take a little bit longer, but I think you could do probably a lot more with it. It's going to be a better image, especially if some of those images printed out kind of grainy or something like that. Another thing is that you could just simply do the exact same thing you did analog, of course, in the digital environment in Photoshop. So, if you do have questions about that, I'd be glad to answer them individually. Otherwise, no questions about scaling? We're all in the same place now, at least? Good. We'll leave it at that for today.